Welcome to Running in the 70s, where we interview, meet, and get to know athletes of all kind who were running in the 70s. I'm your host, Matthew Kleinowski.
Today on the podcast, we're in Santa Fe with a guy who's been to most of the corners of the planet, from the South Pacific and New Zealand, stop off in the UK, now out in the Southwest. If you've read some running books, you may know him as an author. You may know him as a runner. You may know him as a publisher of one of the early and comprehensive running statistics publications from out in Colorado. Let's catch up with somebody who's old enough to run for president now, Paul Christman.
One older than Biden. Yeah.
There we go. All right, Paul, let's talk about your personal running life. When did you first get involved or interested in running?
First of all, sports were always big in my family because my dad was a professional football player. He was the last quarterback to lead the Cardinal franchise to an NFL title, Chicago Cardinals, 47. We always did a lot of sports. And he died suddenly at age 50 of a heart attack. He was a smoker for many years, including while he played football. When he died, thereafter, I started thinking, I don't want to follow in his footsteps. So what am I going to do about it? I'd read Ken Cooper's aerobics. So I said, okay, you need to run. So I started running, and one thing led to another, and you get a little better, you get a little faster, you lose a little weight, and then eventually you do a race and yada, yada.
Where did you grow up?
Hey, here's the answer. I never did. I was born in Columbia, Missouri. My parents came from Kansas City and St. Louis, and so they met in the middle in college. My dad was an All-American at the University of Missouri. I was born there. Then my dad went into the war pretty much right away and was stationed in Brazil in the Navy for 2 or 3 years. And I went to live with my mother, with my grandparents in Kansas City. When he came back and played football in Chicago, we moved there to a suburb of Chicago, Park Ridge, Illinois, which I might add, Harrison Ford was in my graduating class and Hillary Clinton was 4 years behind me. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. You keep in touch with either of those two?
No, I don't. In fact, I wasn't a good friend. I knew Harrison. He was Harry Ford in high school. So I knew him to say hello to, but I really wasn't a close friend of his or anything.
What about running? When did you first get on a track and compete on a road and actually run a race?
That's a good question. I don't remember what my first race was, but pretty quickly I ran the Mission Bay Half Marathon, and that convinced me. I was out one day walking around. I met this young woman in nylon Adidas shoes. She's a runner. And I said, how much you run? She said, oh, about 10 miles a day. And I went, 10 miles a day? Are you kidding me? Anyway, so you know how it goes. Once I ran that half marathon, I thought, well, you could train for a marathon and do it.
What year was that, do you think?
Let's see. I'd say roughly about 67, but I don't know for sure.
Yeah. Apart from discovering that this is something you could do, were you paying attention to the sport, to the U.S. Olympic team results or anything like that?
I don't think so at that time. It came slowly. As you get better, you get more interested in the sport. And you also aspire to run like other people, as you know. I worked at NBC, started as a mailman, and ended up a videotape editor in LA. Lived in Westwood, ran around UCLA a lot. Then I moved to England. I went to my boss and I said, I'd like to get a leave of absence to go to Europe. And he said, your contract says you can only do it for purposes of furthering your career in videotape or film. And I said, I'm getting a general education there, and that's the idea. And he goes, nope. So I said, okay, I quit. That's it. I moved to England and started writing, reading, and running every day, and running a lot more. And then I started training for the London Marathon, the very first London Marathon.
Now I'm starting to see some of the autobiographical features in the Purple Runner, videotape editing and moving to London. What year did you run that first London Marathon?
I'm gonna say it was 80 or 81. I can't remember. I think the first one was 81, but I'm not sure. You'd have to check that. I don't.
Here it is.
Okay.
Purple Runner. Everybody's got to read this book if they haven't already. It's on all the lists of running novels to read.
Yeah. Here's the original.
That wasn't purple. Did you draw that?
No, but a friend of mine did, and she also did this logo on the back, Highgate Lane Press. I wrote that in, I believe, 82 or 83, and then I think it finally came out in 85. But anyway, that's the original. Then you showed the third edition that you just held up.
Let's just divert into this. The Purple Runner, when if someone picks that up to read about it, they'll learn a little bit about New Zealand, quite a bit about running places and the layout of London. Had you been to New Zealand when you wrote this?
Yes, I'm just trying to get the sequencing right. I went to London and finished writing a book I'd started called The 6-Year Haircut, which is about being in the Army Reserves during Vietnam. Then I moved to New Zealand. I lived there for, I believe, 6 months in Remuera, which is a suburb of Auckland. And I had a typewriter, a pot of pan, a plate, not much, and ran some races and ran the Hash House Harriers and met a lot of people, including Lorraine Muller and Ron Dawes and yada yada. Anyway, it's a very small country. So if you're a runner, you meet pretty much everybody fairly quickly.
Yeah, I've interviewed Lorraine, and I'll talk to Ann Audane is out in Colorado. Rudd Dixon's down on the South Island. Did you travel much around, or did you stick around in Auckland mostly, apart from racing? Where you?
No, I did travel quite a bit. I went down. In fact, one of the scenes, the beginning of the Purple Runner is about, I think I called it the Rotorua Marathon, but it's actually the Fletcher Challenge. I actually ran that marathon around the lake. So that was one trip. I went up to the north. If you keep going north, you hit Citrus Farms and Bay of Islands. And then I head south, I met Lorraine in Auckland and Ron, but actually I went as far as Christchurch to watch Lorraine in a meet. I don't remember, it was a national meet. That's how far south I got. Didn't get all the way to Dunedin, and I didn't do the famous tracks on the fjords on the West Coast.
My wife and I, because we're Hash House Harriers, we go down there all the time. So we've looped and kayaked overnight in Doubtful Sound. And yeah, the country's a playground. Running in Rotorua smells a little different than a lot of other places.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know that much about New Zealand. It has more coastline than the continental US. You could, at that time, go out in the surf and just run your hand through the sand and pick up a bucket of razor clams, which you can't do in the US because it's clammed out, but there you could. And no point is farther than 75 miles from the sea. So everyone has marine air, which is good for running, great for racehorse development. Pine trees grow in 10 years instead of 20 years in Oregon. There's a lot of unique things about New Zealand. You have the Maoris and the Islanders, or the Fiji Islanders, and quite a diverse place.
No,
At that time, the men still wore the national costume a lot. Not all the men, but the, say, green Bermudas with the matching green Loden shirt, short sleeve, and or navy blues, same thing. And it was like, wait a minute, this is like 19th century stuff. This is early 80s, and they were still wearing it.
We'll talk about running in a second, but what was this sense of adventure in you that's taking you? It wasn't something people did on their own to pick up and move to these different continents.
Well, I moved for the running. I thought the two most famous places to me at that time were England, or Britain probably, and New Zealand, because I had read Arthur Lydiard. And Arthur Lydiard's the most famous coast. He's dead now. I actually went for a run with him through One Tree Hill Park, Maungakiki as it is in Maori. Met him. He was quite the character, spindly-legged, short, but angry that he was no longer the man he had been when he was the famous coach. But he's still coaching.
Hey, what about the writing? When did you think of yourself as a writer or think that you could write books?
I got bored with graduate business school at Wisconsin, so I went down to the bookstore and got a stack of books. I remember Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. Once I started reading, I got more and more interested in writing and reading. Meanwhile, they were drafting 80,000 a month when I got out of graduate school. So I thought, I've got about 2 seconds to go to Canada, get 4F, or join a reserve unit or a National Guard. There were 2-year waiting lists at all the units except for one unit, Troop 4E Cavalry, a highly expendable armored cavalry unit that precedes a brigade into battle, had been recalled in every war. If it doesn't like what it sees, it gets wiped out and saves the brigade. And so I joined that. Then I quickly transferred to the West Coast where I'd gotten a job in graduate school with the Bank of America in San Francisco. So I moved there. That's how that evolved. All this time I wasn't running yet. I'm just party animal and studying a
Yeah.
little there.
All right, we've had this journey around, so we've already covered a couple continents. What do you have to say about the Purple Run? How did the idea come? Who informed it? And did you know there would be sequel?
Um, I when I got out of graduate school, joined that reserve unit, I said, people would not believe this is happening. This kind of behavior, boys behaving badly to get out of Vietnam. Otherwise, you're going to the rice paddies. And I didn't want to kill or be killed. So I wrote this book on a typewriter called The 6-Year Haircut. I still have it. I just went over it again. I'm probably not going to publish it because I don't think it would be appropriate right now. It wouldn't be politically correct. Laughing at behavior during Vietnam. Then, when I told you I moved to New Zealand, I really became more and more interested in running hash house harriers. I joined a local club. So I started writing and I set myself a goal. I think it's important when you write to have a goal. My goal, I believe at the time, was either 3 or 5 pages a day, typewritten on a typewriter. I would stick to it and I might go for an early run and then write or write and then run, but I always got it done in the morning. So it came very quickly. The first draft of the Purple Runner was done fairly quickly because of the, I think it was a little somewhere around the 200 pages. Oh, first I went to a coffee house and I thought of the characters I want to do and the story. That's important as well. I love to outline. Dickens would do up to 60 pages when he outlined. Some people never outline, they just start writing and keep going, but it's hard to get to the end and it's hard to have a good story if you don't know where you're going or who the characters are.
All right. You were a runner for many years, more like a 3-hour marathoner than a 2-hour marathoner.
That's right.
But so how did you inhabit the mind, the training, the performance, the timing of the Purple Runner
Well,
to challenge the world best?
first of all, as most people know, the Purple Runner is an amalgam, but two of the characters of which were based upon Steve Prefontaine, and the other one, Jerry Lindgren, who had disappeared. Meanwhile, I read every running book I could find, so I knew a lot about training and my own level of performance, and I knew what it took to get to certain levels. So I just did some math. What would it take to run under 2 hours? And if you do the math, I think I at one point had one session where he's doing us like 6 by a mile in 408 or 410, because you're going to have, as from that guy, Kenyon, that ran it, even with pacers, you still have to run like, what, 435 a mile or something?
Yeah, the whole way. Yeah.
So anyway, I really got hammered on badly. Everybody said, it's impossible. Nobody will ever do it. And I said, wait a minute. They told Roger Bannister the same thing about the mile, the sub 4-minute mile. No one thought it could be done. Now look at they're running at 3:43. So the point is, I said it'll happen, but they were right. It didn't happen for 30 years after I said it would happen.
What was the running scene in around London? suburban London when you were there, letting yourself?
I joined the Highgate Harriers at the bottom of Hampstead Heath, and they were a fun group. I got to know a bunch of guys. We go out and drink beer, and they'd have regular track meets at a track. And cross country was unbelievable there because of the Hampstead Heath. Fabulous cross country courses, hills and grass and mud. It's very traditional there, so that was a lot of fun too.
How competitive were you as a person?
Not very, because I wasn't good enough, and also because my father was famous, I really didn't want to try to outdo him, even in running, and yet I did want to get better and better. And then my ultimate goal was a sub 40-minute 10K, which I did. I think my best was 38 or 37 something, maybe even 36. I can't remember. Anyway, then the marathon, I wanted to break 3. Everybody has goals, but once I broke 3, I ran 2:58 in New York and then 2:56 with a tailwind in Boston. That was it. What am I going to do now? I was already training pretty hard for my own ability. And I was a big guy. My dad's a football player. So I was always, even at my fittest, I was probably between 178 and 184. And
Wow. Yeah.
I'm trying to think of the world record holder from Australia. He was 6'2". I asked him how much he weighed, and I think he weighed about 160. I tell people, when you're racing Kenyans and you're an American, if you outweigh them by 20 pounds, it's like you're racing them with holding 2 grocery bags. Yes, it's a win.
Uh-huh.
My thought was the same. I got it really thin for me, for my size, and I'm pretty much a mesomorph, not an ectomorph. And that was the best I figured I could do. And I was getting older. I was over 40. I thought, whatever, I'll keep running, but those goals, I attained them. That's it. You know?
That's something we haven't talked a lot about with the other people here is the parting side. Certainly the elite athletes aren't drinking so much, but it's a culture of the Hash House Harriers. It's a
You
culture
know,
of the British runners to have a beer. Lorraine Moeller talks about as soon as she was old enough to drink, or before she was old enough to drink, she'd be told to go have a Guinness and stuff after the runs. It was a culture that was very common then, right?
absolutely. Yeah. I always thought most of the runners I know, including, I don't know if you'd mind this, but Rod Dixon, were heavy beer drinkers, and they would drink a lot of beer. We had one guy in England. He was known for finishing a marathon. I can't think of his name now, but he would drink up to 29 pints after a marathon. Yeah.
Ah,
That was,
sounds like, yeah, Andre the Giant. Yeah.
yeah. So you're right. Hopefully, eventually, as you progress through the decades, your body tells you you cannot recover from that amount of alcohol anymore. You pare down, and like right now, 3 or 4 nights a week, I have 1 or 2 drinks. And if I go to a dinner party, I have a 4 or 5 glasses of wine, but I might have 1 or 2 or 3 nights I don't drink just
Yeah.
because my body can't handle it anymore.
Certainly Arthur Lydiard too was a
Yeah.
beer man.
Yep.
I want to talk about some of the people that you've passed by and gotten to know that made an impression on you that either informed your books or that you became especially interested in their stories of.
Mhm. Well, there are quite a few that influenced it. I mentioned in the Purple Runner, I mentioned Salazar, and trying to think of the other one from Australia. Anyway, yeah, we had a big group in Boulder one time. A bunch of them lived in the Wonderland Hills. Very famous Priscilla Welch and Frank Shorter and Arturo Barrios. There were like 10 famous runners living there at one time. Sometimes on a Sunday morning, we'd start out together, meeting Rob DiCastella. That's something. He would actually run like an 8 or 9 minute mile to accommodate people starting out. And then gradually they'd pick it up and you'd say goodbye because you were going to run slower. But it was fun. And then we'd do a lot of potlucks and Thanksgivings and Christmases where people didn't go back home. We'd have these long tables with 20 or 30 runners, and nothing would ever be left. People would just tear through it. Runners can eat more than anybody if they're running 60 miles a week or more.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Did you run at Potts Field? Were you on the track?
In Boulder,
Yeah.
I did some workouts on the track, as did everybody else, but you ran Sometimes you drive up into the mountains and run the Switzerland Trail, an old railroad bed that went up 26 miles to Ward, elevation 9,200 feet. Or you'd run in mountain trails. There are all kinds of mountains. It's right against the Flatirons, or you'd run. Some ran on the streets, and there are all kinds of trails east of town that you can run on that are flatter if you want a flat run. So it was a really nice place to run.
Let's talk about steps running publication and how that came. What was the world of publication of statistics of
Well,
running when you started?
I was just reading about Susan Henderson running the women's marathon in LA, and her husband, Matt, and I were sitting around one day. He's a pretty good runner, somewhere around 30 minutes for 10K. We're talking about there's nothing in the newspapers. We get no results. Let's start a publication. So he and I started one, and I got a Xerox memory writer with the bouncing ball. We started out, but then he and his wife wanted to move to Oregon, so we split apart, and I just took over. I ran into Keith Peters of Nike. He was in Boulder for maybe the Boulder. And I said, I really could use some sponsorship money. So he said, how much you need? He said, we'll sponsor you. So that was my first sponsor with Nike. And then I usually built it up to 3 or 4 sponsors until near the end, it was tapering off. I was down to the Atlanta Track Club, was my most loyal sponsor. I survived on sponsorships, small but important subscription list of people in the industry, agents, race directors, elite athletes, yada, yada. I never had huge circulation, but I had some important readers.
What was the span of years that ran?
Okay, it's 23 years. So I started roughly 85 and went through 2007, I believe. Yeah.
And who was in charge of the Atlanta Track Club that gave you that sponsorship?
That was Julie Emmons. She was very helpful. Then Benji Durden and his wife Amy really helped me for years. If it wasn't for them, I never would have. He's a computer genius, so he helped me a lot. I had correspondents that did it for basically free. I'd send them a nominal fee a year, and then I had always a couple copy editors, ladies, runners, good runners that would help out once a week, just look at it for an hour.
How much time did you have to put in?
Yeah, I think I put in about 20 hours a week on it. At the end, I was painting houses full time to make ends meet because my revenues were never big. I think the biggest year I ever had was maybe 25,000, and a lot of years under 20. So I had to supplement with, I'd be doing a lot of stuff.
Did making that lead to any adventures or interactions that wouldn't have happened
Oh,
otherwise?
tons. I always tell the great story. I called it the 9-hour lunch. I got a lot of free partial trips, either airfares or hotels or both. Because I said, I'm not a journalist, I'm a diarist. I only attend races that I think deserve the attention of having a good elite runner field to write about. So I'd go to London quite a bit. I got to know Dave Bedford and a few others. One day I'm there and we started at about 10 or 11 in the morning and we're playing liar's poker with bills. I don't know if you ever played that.
Yeah.
We go to a pub, we start drinking, and we drink for a few hours, have lunch, more drinking, wine. Then we come back, pick up somebody's girlfriend, and we go to dinner. Anyway, by the time we got home on the train, way out in West London someplace, we were completely blitzed. It was 9 hours of drinking, and these guys
Right.
in marathon. We had a great time. It was really fun.
Okay, where on the scale through these decades from your start in the 60s and doing a half marathon, where do you rank them or what's changed for the better, for the worse, stayed the same among the great marathons of the world that you covered? What's been their
So
run?
the question is, and when you're a journalist, you hear a lot of stuff about drugs. And there's no question at the top, there's a level of drugs. Not everyone, but uh, there are some that argue you can't be at the top without drugs in many sports, blood doping among them. And so I'd have people tell me stories, but I would say to people, look, You have your attorney put it in writing, I'll publish it. But don't tell me something on the telephone, which then later you'll say, I never told you that when I get burned for it. In other words, you're accusing somebody of something. So if you're willing to accuse them, go on paper or have your attorney go on paper, and then I'll publish it. And I think a lot of journalists feel that way because you hear all kinds of stuff. Over time, I had probably at least 10 known runners that you'd know the names of that people would tell me he's doing the juice or he did blood doping. And I remember one famous runner who still active did as a coach, and he said to me, I don't think the Kenyans are doing anything to you. Do you? Like, let's put it this way. The average wage in Kenya is $270 a year. Somebody tells you if you take this magic substance, you'll make 20 to 30,000 in 1 year. What's the question? Not everyone's going to do it, but some are. That's the point.
Sure. Yeah, there's a famous football soccer player who donates money and changes the life of village. And you got to see people saying, "Hey, I can change the life of my family and my village if I win one major marathon." Yeah, it seems impossible to resist for everyone. And you've been in this for a long time. Part of the knowing everybody reading your publication, the sport is not without scandal the whole way through, from marriages, broken marriages, misbehavior, all that stuff.
Sure.
And some of it's been told, some of it's custom knowledge, but not talked about. The US, what's your reflection on, say, the period of that 70s through 2008, the ups and downs of US running? It certainly had peaks and valleys. Is that just the nature of the sport? What do you think about government involvement, professionalism, that kind of stuff?
I think Americans in general, and this is obviously not everyone, grow up not getting nearly as much exercise as, say, an African, running to and from school and eating ugali and not at McDonald's. So typically, an American, no matter how much they train or how good an athlete he or she is, tend to be heavier than their counterparts. So for distance runners, that is influential. And right now, you see Ethiopians and Kenyans winning a lot of distance races, not so many Americans. However, that said, there are the people that are doing the work or have the body type, the ectomorphic body type, or what have you. I think America has done pretty well competitively in middle distance and sprints. But in terms of long distance, I think again, when weight is such a factor, and most American runners are carrying 10 or 20 pounds more than their African or other counterparts, that is a significant difference.
Oh.
And they're running as well over 5,000, 10,000 of the marathon. Not always, because there are people who can do it. But if you look at, say, the people that are running close to 2 hours in the marathon, males, whereas American men are generally running more between 2:04 and 2:10. You know.
Uh,
And I think there again, we're talking body type, cultural growth while you're training, you're eating at McDonald's, you're driving everywhere instead of running. And there are a lot of factors, but again, if a Kenyan weighs 120 and you weigh 140 and you both do the same training, who's carrying the two grocery bags? You know,
Yeah, that's great. What about the path arc of your writing? That you branched out of writing just about running. You've returned to address the Purple Runners later exploits. And
yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about some of that stuff. So I've got them here. So I'll just hold one up. While I'm being a librarian and substitute teacher in Santa Fe is my 10th career or whatever, I was still always writing. So this is a book called Skins of Lightning. It's about a teacher who decides his kids are not motivated or disciplined enough. So he introduces cross country teams. So that one book about that. Then I wrote another one called Santa Monica Dead Palms. This is a book about performance enhancing drugs for both track and field athletes and men, and without revealing too much, there are quite a few people in here that are loosely based on real life characters. And I think that's true. Most authors do that. Or they're amalgams of people based on real life people.
And that one has runners behaving badly a bit in it, huh?
Yeah, as you and I discussed, there is a noted runner from a state that we know of that, as a sidebar, was, for lack of a better method of expressing it, turning tricks for money.
Yeah.
And she ends up with one of the lead characters in the book, and they discuss drugs in the sport, etc. So anyway, then people always said, "What happened to the Purple Runner? He just runs away at the end of the marathon." So that's where I came up with this book, which
Put him on a bike, yeah.
yeah, he's now a cyclist. He still runs, but he's more of a cyclist in Boulder. This whole book takes place in Boulder. It's a lot of the characters on that are based on real life people. This is a Tanzanian who I got to know, and you would know his name if I said it, but I'm not going to say it. But anyway, it's got a racing conclusion, and they form a club called the Holy Grail, and they discuss ethereal topics. Because we actually did that in Boulder one time, a bunch of us, some of which were runners and some weren't. But
And what kind of personal feedback did you get from maybe some of the people who saw themselves in the book? For Purple Runner, you use a lot of first names of people and everybody knows who you're talking about. It wasn't scandalous. It was just reference to great runners. What kind of feedback did you get when Purple
well,
Runner came?
actually, I haven't, because very few people have read any of these books. My marketing skills are limited. I'm working on that. Whereas I've sold a lot of the Purple Runner, thousands of copies, I can't say the same about any of these. So the answer is nobody that I have vaguely hinted at might be a basis character has gotten back to me. I don't know who's read it and who hasn't, but sales have been limited and I need to get on.
Okay, maybe we can help here. Yeah.
Finally, there's one more. It's the sequel to Santa Monica Dead Pound. The two young women in this case can both run under 2 minutes for 800 meters. It's like a Charlie's Angels, and he's a runner, but they're all private investigators.
What's
the Farolito's shadow?
Farolitos? Okay.
Farolito is a Spanish term for lantern, a little lantern. So the little lantern shadow, but this is about drug theft in Santa Fe. But there is a chase scene where one of the females has to chase somebody.
The Purple Runner has got some just great intrigue of this underground lair. Is that based on anything? Or is that out of your mind? Or it's a little bit of spycraft?
In the Purple Runner? Like what? Give me an example. I don't know what you're referring to.
The runner would have a key in the tree trunk and peel back a bar.
Oh, yeah. Yes. Good question. I was staying with friends in Southwest London, and they were helping me look for a place in the paper. And they spotted a place in Highgate, which is near Hampstead. These are both north of London, right on the Hampstead Heaths. And it turned out it was in the back of a National Trust house, right on the Heath. And it did have a giant redwood tree on the property and a monkey tree. So I fictionalized, yes, that the rest, the underground. But after I fictionalized that underground cave he lived in, which could access both through the allotment gardens or through a tree, it turns out that Winston Churchill had an underground station built way under the Heath, so it was never used as an escape point for government officials. So it turned out that even though this was a fictional tube station down there, there actually was one, not right there, but close by, not too far, maybe within a mile.
How much of a chameleon type person are you living in Great Britain, even though they're English speaking, the cultures are distinct? Did that change you permanently, temporarily? But I'm a big New Zealand fan.
No, a lot of things affected me. The British sense of humor. Like, for instance, I go take Eurostar to Paris. I come back, I get off in the station, I'm walking down a ramp and a guy's in front of me. He doesn't know who's behind him. He pulls on the doors to open the doors. They won't open. Without missing a beat, he turns over his shoulder and says, "Oh, obviously made by the French." That's the kind of humor we don't have in the US very often. Every guy is a humorist or woman in Britain, and I love that. I love the spontaneous humor. Sense of humor, be trying to work on your wit, working on your writing and reading to improve your vocabulary ability to express yourself. To me, Europeans and New Zealanders have a better grasp of the essence of life, which is meals and or drinks with friends and travel, not making a ton of money and acquiring possessions. I'm not saying that's wrong. It's just not our focus and not my focus. Never has been. Those are the probably if I'm going to do takeaways from those two countries. Both parties in New Zealand, again, I think the emphasis is on your leisure time being as valuable as your work time in both countries, as opposed to a lot of Americans are workaholics. They can't relax. And so I can. I'm good at relaxing. But I can also get a lot done and witness these books.
Yeah. When is the most recent published date? When did something just wrap
Okay,
up?
this one I'm having a launch party in about a week. And this one, official release date is May 1st. So that's pretty
Cool.
recent. And this is within the last year as well. The sequel to
Uh-huh.
Warner. Yeah. Yeah. And what's expedited all this is I retired. I was a librarian in an elementary school in the south side of Santa Fe for 10 years. And I retired, and that's enabled me to have the time to go through all these. I'd already written them years ago, to go through them again, refine them, edit them, and get them ready for publication. Only retirement has enabled me to do that.
When you left Colorado, did you go straight there? Where did you go at the end? At the end
Well,
of wrapping up the
well,
staff?
several friends used to come down to ride bikes and hang out at a place called the Pink Adobe here, the Dragon Room, drink margaritas, ride bikes and drink margaritas. But anyway, I decided I'd leave Boulder because it's a college town. And the older you get, the more you feel your age. You are a year older, they're the same age. So by the time you're 65, the invitations start drying up. Like you have friends your own age, but I'm talking about people in the business are in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. So I'd come down here many times and I said, "Why are you moving to Santa Fe?" Well, it's okay to be old in Santa Fe. It's a real retirement place. B, I like Southwestern cuisine, architecture, and furniture. All. So it's a very unique town. It's an Adobe themed town. We don't have any skyscrapers. We have one hotel that's probably 6 stories, but that's very few buildings like that. So that's a plus for me.
When did your running time come to an end? I know you're not running anymore.
Age 65.
Mhm.
I was out, my leg started really hurting, and it turned out I needed a hip replacement. But also my time, I ran some after that. But anyway, my times were getting slower and slower to 13 minutes a mile. I said, forget it. I'm walking. I'm not, this isn't a run anyway. So
We all have to make these transitions from either you're competing and you're not as competitive, or you're unable to do something that feels like it did when you're in your mind, you're still 18 or 21. Did you see other people in the field as acquainted with so many people and interacting with them, people talking about how am I going to deal with this? Sometimes people will have something happen, an injury, take them out, and they'll disappear from the community because they're just like, I don't feel part of it. We don't have to have names, but stories or thoughts of those transitions in life. And as you're a writer, have you written about that? Or are you still writing about people in our heyday?
I prefer to write with people that are active and able to put in the miles. But that's an interesting question because I'm sure I know people, but by and large, I think people try to hang on as long as they can and be competitive. I know a lot of people still running, but also thinking themselves as competitive in their age groups, certainly into their 50s, but some into their 60s. So it's more of a slow attrition rate where they just, you don't see them in races anymore and you're not there anymore to see them.
Yeah,
So
like you said, with the change of the invitations coming less as you age out of the key parts of the business world or the active world, that can be a part of it. What are you doing for goal setting then?
I've got two more books that I probably won't publish because, again, I don't think they're politically correct. But then I swim twice a week and walk. This morning I walked in the mall. I walked 2 miles. I've got a few health issues that mandate that I take it easy. I take a couple of days off a week or I can get run down and yada, yada. But in terms of goals, I think I'll probably decide to write one more. And I'm not sure yet what it's going to be. I've thought about different possibilities of, for instance, a third sequel to The Purple Runner, another sequel to the mystery series, or something just entirely different. I really like doing stuff, but I'll probably always put a little running in it, even though I don't run anymore.
Yeah.
Just because I have a real fondness for all the memories and the great experiences. And of course, the greatest thing, not the greatest thing, another tangent is how a lot of running over time assists you with longevity and the ability to eat and drink more, which
Mm,
you enjoy eating and drinking, which I do. Is
sure.
now as you get older, you still have to pare down. There's no doubt because you're not getting as much exercise. But it really helps over the long term. And I'm still here right now.
Some of the people you mentioned that were supporters of yours, like Benji Turner, you're still in touch with those people from the days.
Sometimes it's been a while now, but until recently, I would go up to Boulder because I lived there for 20 years or so. I'd go back, visit people there. I still know a ton of people there, and a lot of them are still there. Like Lorraine Muller still lives there, and many famous cyclists, climbers, runners, they all still live there. Frank Shorter, I think he still has a house there. And Arturo Barrios lives in the next community over. And over time, I've had meals like last time I was there, I had a couple of breakfasts with Steve Jones. He's been a good friend. He actually, believe it or not, this is a former world record holder, painted houses with me for a while. He's a working class guy. He got some tattoos on his arms.
Yeah. So do you go up the ladders? When was the last time you painted a house?
No, I could, but the answer is no, I don't want to, nor will I. If I had to push him to shove, I could do a low ceilinged interior, but I wouldn't want to be on a high ladder outside on a house now. No, not anymore. I did a lot of that. And I did a lot of also painting as opposed or rolling as opposed to spraying. I did some spraying, but I usually hire somebody to spray because getting it exactly right, you had guys that really can do it well, and you're better off just painting them. So when I
Yeah.
paint, yeah.
I came from the mid 70s, Western Pennsylvania, and there was the Western Pennsylvania, New York guys. Some of them were very near elite runners that were out in Boulder. Mark Muggleton, Pete Lucas, Steve Francis, this era there. And they would all work in the shoe stores, go
Did you
run.
did you say Steve Francis?
Yeah.
Steve Francis designed the logo or top of the cover for the first running stats, the original logo.
Really? Steve, that is now a emergency room psychologist in New York.
Wow.
This is Steve that went to NC State and was,
I don't know where he went to school, but he lived in Boulder.
yeah, he lived in the dungeon, I think, maybe with his. But
What?
yeah, he's quite an interesting guy. Yeah, I didn't know he had these design skills either, or was that just a passion?
Well, wait, you asked me this question about the demise of runners or disappearance. Do you find that the people you ran with competitive at your level, you have a lot of stories regarding them telling you I'm leaving because and I didn't have many people tell me that.
I don't want to mention names and
Yeah.
just talk to somebody who we had to go off the record to talk about, but there are people who just because of the times, we're sure there are people that deal with their challenges of life, or perhaps it is the change in your performance and expectations. There's drug and alcohol that has taken a toll on some of the people through these last 50 years, people that were competing in the 60s and 70s. So that's where I was thinking of. There's some people didn't make it out at all that really took a lethal toll on them. It's a personality of runners is the community is so powerful. The common thing that I found talking to everybody else that I was hoping to say, is it the same as it is for you as it is for me? Because I got out of the running community fairly young with injuries, but it's the community part that is common and sustaining. And the loss of that community, if something happens, is perhaps the bigger risk to people's well being.
I've been good at moving and making new friends and acquaintances my whole life, and I enjoy it. I find it invigorating. But that said, for many years, I've lived here now since '07, so that's 17 years. I went back to Boulder many times and still do occasionally now and see those people, and I value them as friends. I hope they value me. But I've been okay with leaving people behind and then starting anew because as a writer, you need new material, you need new experiences. So both work for me. And I don't end everything just because I've left. I still maintain contact with some people in Boulder, although it's been a while now. But in other places in LA, I talk to people out there. San Francisco, I still have friends there. People I talk to fairly regularly. So
How much of a fan are you now of what's going on racing and the running?
I just watched in the Bahamas the relays, which I
Yeah.
loved. I thought it was fabulous. But my absolute favorite is World Cross Country, although this year wasn't as exciting because it was a flat course. I love watching cross country. I watch all the big meets in Europe. When I watch Prefontaine, I watch. So the answer is yeah, and I catch up on what I can on letsrun.com, blah, blah, blah. Although I don't
Yeah.
subscribe to all the magazines anymore.
Yeah.
Are you still following it? Yeah.
I do a podcast about the Hash House Harriers history, but especially since I've done this and I'm focusing on people who passed through the decade of the 70s, but my reconnecting with a lot of friends from Pennsylvania era. And Pennsylvania had a 4-minute high school miler in the same year that these guys from California, who are now running in Northern Arizona, the Young Brothers and the Sullivans. So there was this giant group of 4-minute milers from high school. And this year, there's 40 kids running faster than
Yeah.
Lindgren's 2-mile record.
Now,
Yeah.
do you attribute much of that to the new shoes or not?
Oh, I think like everybody else, I got to buy into the 2 to 5% improvement, but I think it's specialization in sports. And if you are elite class, we're getting the elite class runners who maybe would have played football, basketball. Kids tend to be more one sport now. So we're getting this elite performance level in a lot of sports. We're also getting 12-year-olds who are running 16 minutes and 5K. There's a lot of weird stuff going on that the world's changing in many ways. I wonder what your perspective is. I'm always thinking 200 years from now, what are they going to think of us? They're going to say, oh my God, these guys put garbage cans in front of their house and they did this and the strange things that we did. And how will that appear as what we let the kids do? Because you interacted with kids all the time over the last decades.
Right.
I mean, you're looking really good for your age. You've led a kind of a balanced lifestyle. You enjoy food and drink, and it's wearing well on you. And you've had this daily contact with youth.
Yeah, I've been lucky or fortunate because I think if you do stay active for most of your life, as long as you can, again, longevity is a part of that equation. But that's just my belief. People would argue what we do have some data, but then again, we can't really prove directly. There are a lot of factors, yada, yada, genetics. But by the way, I always argued that Genetic predisposition is often nothing more than inherited bad habits. His dad died of a heart attack and then he died of a heart attack. Why did that happen? Because they both had high fat diets and didn't exercise. So, in other words, genetic predisposition is often inherited bad habits. Like my dad died at 50. I'm still alive at 81. Why is that? Because I
Yeah.
chose a different path. I smoked for 4 years, but I got rid of it.
And personally, it's good news for me because my dad, same thing, 20 camels a day. And he died, 10, 12 years younger than I am now. Yeah. There's hope. All right. uh, but I just really, I keep bringing it up, but I just want to fanboy. I love the Purple Runner. I love that not just for the running, but it has details of workouts and times. And yeah, the guy throwing in a 4:10 mile when he wants to get rid of people on a workout's a little
You
insanity. That doesn't sound so different from the way Jerry would run. I really enjoyed the scenarios, the places that you described and all that too.
Yeah, like the 72 5,000 with Pre, where he takes off with a mile to go, foolishly pulling people behind him in an 8% draft. That was a major tactical blunder.
Yeah. I just published an interview with Jerry.
You mentioned it. And what did he reveal that was of interest?
I have to call him back. We talked for about an hour and he's in Hawaii. So it's 10 o'clock at night for me. And so I need to just coordinate that with him.
Yeah.
The amazing thing about him is the specificity that he remembers things. I asked him, tell me about that race with Billy Mills, where they tied time wise for the 6 mile world record. And he went lap by lap.
Wow. That is, I can remember times, but not that, not that.
But there's stories that I've heard about Jerry, or we just mentioned and didn't record, like when he went to Russia and he got there before the team and he went running and he got grabbed by the KGB and brought him back in. So, where are you going? And he's just, I just went for a run. I got out of the airport and started running. And just 18 years old, the astonishing to me is how young he was at that level and coming from his background and the way he faced the challenges and his whole psychology of it. It's great to talk to you. Any other stories that you think?
I'm thinking without revealing names, and if you could reveal the names and say the stories, it would make it more impactful, but can't do it. Though, particularly if I were to roll off, people have told me who's on drugs, you go, what? You can't do that because there's no proof. And also, there is some backbiting where somebody doesn't like somebody, they'll just bend it a bit, you know. So you never know. But anyway, lots of stories, some good, some bad, but a lot of fun ones over the years. And of course, everybody's got their own race and post race experiences that are really fun.
There are people who have that one book in them, their autobiography, that are hesitating.
That's like my story from NBC. I worked at NBC News in Burbank for many years. I was a videotape editor at the end, and I was asked if I wanted to go to Jonestown.
Really?
Yeah, and the people that went, the editor was shot in the arm and escaped to tell about it. The correspondent was shot to death. The cameraman shot to death. The field producer, like 3 of them were killed. And the guy who went in I was asked, and I said, no, it's dangerous. It said, he got shot in the arm and put his hand up like this, and he was lying under the plane, the blood running down his face. They came around and shot people at point blank to make sure they're dead, but they saw the blood in his face and said he's dead. So he ran into the bushes and was rescued the next day.
I've read that story. I met a lot of people that I've listened and read about Jonestown a lot. I think I remember his story of the not getting shot because they thought he was dead. And
Yeah.
wow. Yeah, that's a good point in time. I'll put that in this podcast. What kind of other historic things did you get into? Any other big stories? What do you think back on your career?
Well, it's many a moon up in San Francisco during the Patty Hearst trial. And story, and among other things. And I also was in Honolulu when one of our correspondents got an exclusive interview with the whatever he was, premier of South Korea or whatever at the time. And so we had to feed that into New York, and it was a real coup at the time because nobody else had it. Over time, while traveling and doing stories, lots of stuff. I did mainly features for the Today Show. I did one on Rod Stewart. I had a lot of Feeling Fine by Dr. Art Uleen. That was a big one.
There's some hashers retired into the villages in Florida, that retirement city. I went down, visited them, and there was a cameraman from the Heidi Gang. And he told me the story of, I'm telling them, don't switch away. And he was,
There, whatever. At our age, there's plenty of stories.
yeah, crazy. Anybody who's listening to this who is going to be sitting somewhere and want to read another good book, I highly recommend The Purple Rudder. It's fun. It's a great book. It's the 2-hour marathon on a real course is coming, and you can read about one guy's adventure that started 4 decades ago thinking he could do it.
That's right.
So,
all right.
I've been looking forward to talking to you for a long time, Paul. Thank you for all your time.
Thanks. I'm glad. Thanks for giving me a call, and hopefully I'll catch some of your shows.
Okay. Thanks, Paul.
Okay.
I hope you enjoyed another episode of Running in the 70s. Voices, stories, and memories of athletes who were running in the 70s. Until next time, wherever you are, keep looking forward and don't forget to look back.